Hello, I'm Chuck Martin, and welcome to the Voices of the Internet of Things. With me today is Tony Parisi, Global Head of VR and AR Strategy at Unity Technologies, the company with a content creation engine used for virtual and augmented reality and reaching more than 2 billion devices. Tony has been Editor-in-Chief of Learning WebGL, CEO of Media Machines, and founder of Form VR. Tony is a virtual reality pioneer, and at Unity, he oversees the company's strategy for all the realities. Welcome, Tony.
Thanks. Great to be here, Chuck.
Great stuff. Can you give me you've got a really in-depth background. Before we start to talk about AR and VR and so forth, can you just give our listeners a quick rundown of your background?
Yeah, sure. I came up in software engineering, professional software engineer, working on business products, scientific products back in the late 80s, early 90s. And then I discovered early virtual reality because my then girlfriend, now wife, brought Jaron Lanier, a pioneer of VR from the late 80s, early 90s, to her college, Mass College of Art in Boston, in fact, which is the area that I'm from. And I saw virtual reality, and it was this big, clunky system with very low polygon, low resolution graphics. And I thought it was cool and interesting. Didn't really think it was going to change the world anytime soon just because of the, sort of largeness and crudeness of it. But over the next few years, began to read science fiction novels that talked about virtual reality, such as Neuromancer by William Gibson, Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson, and got inspired by those quite a bit. And then wife and I decided to move out to San Francisco just to try something different. And I was already working in tech. And I started looking at the internet as the next frontier. The early web browsers were coming out. But then I connected up with this fellow named Mark Pesce, and he said he wanted to do a project to connect 3D graphics to the internet. And and that came to be known as something called VRML, the Virtual Reality Markup Language. And Mark and I were two of the people who created that and kind of drove it through. It was an early attempt to bring 3D graphics into web browsers, which was way too early. The computers weren't powerful enough. The internet was still on dial-up modem, so we couldn't really get enough content across. And in fact, at that point in time, and now we're talking 1994, 1995, people barely knew how to make a web page, right? So it was a great vision, but it was kind of super early. But I kept at it and kept working in the field of 3D graphics. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately. It kind of turns out that what I didn't know at the time, but I've realized in hindsight, is that when I was a kid, I went to see the first Star Wars movie. And it was that image of Princess Leia on the tabletop delivering the urgent message to the Resistance, to Obi-Wan Kenobi, that kind of stuck in my brain. And in hindsight, I looked at this and it was like I was finding the 3D graphics programming projects at these other random companies I was working at. So I guess it was all sort of meant to be. And after I worked on VRML, I continued in the field of 3D visualization and virtual reality and related fields for 20 years.
So why didn't you give up early? Because VR in the early days was, clunky, as you said. That's a kind word.
Well, I'm just super passionate about 3D graphics. 3D graphics as interface, 3D graphics as a media type. Someday this is, and we're seeing the signals of this now and the foundations of this being laid now with the new wave of consumer virtual and augmented reality. Someday this technology will be the main interface to how we interact with each other and interact with computers in a digital setting, whether it's holograms or immersive virtual reality. Things represented like they are in the real world are just more intuitive. They transcend language barriers and cultural barriers to some extent, and they're just a more natural way of working. So, when our computer systems become capable enough to use that kind of technology on a mass scale, that's what's going to be the next interface. And that vision's been driving me since I've been working in 3D for these 20 plus years.
So is everything requiring, is it basically what's driving it or facilitating it, computing power?
Well, there's a lot. Ultimately it comes to computing power and miniaturization, right? You need to get the computing power connected to devices that are small enough and comfortable enough to use, whether it's a phone doing phone-based augmented reality like the new crop of phones coming up from Apple and the Android ecosystem, or it's glasses or goggles that are comfortable enough. And so you have all of that stuff is all about the, electronics being miniaturized, display devices. So it's not just the computing power, but getting display devices light and comfortable enough that can do this. It's optics, it's advances in, the engineering around that. So it's not just the computing power, but in some sense that's at the heart of it, because you need to actually drive computation has to drive a lot of the graphics being displayed, and that is much more computationally intensive than the stuff we're doing in a standard web browser or 2D application on mobile. And those technologies, that's why Unity is in such a great position around this, because we've been pioneering those kind of technologies and getting them into the hands of thousands and now millions of developers, starting with video gaming, which was one of the driving industries that really, had an economics behind it that would drive these kind of innovations, right? There's a big business in consumer video games, and so that justifies going through the enormous development intensive effort required to build a game engine like a Unity. It justifies the cost of production expenses for the big studios making the games, or even the 2 or 3 little indie studio, person indie studio. They're going to team up. They're going to make an investment in this because there's a business in gaming. So those things came together and drove the consumer adoption of 3D graphics technology, which had been being used in other areas like film with high-end visual effects that we see on our big film screens, or computer-aided design in enterprise settings like designing cars and airplanes and such. So these technologies at the consumer level, largely driven by gaming and entertainment, and that's what's put Unity in this position. So yeah, I mean, a lot of it is about computation at the end of the day.
So at Unity, you break down, or the company breaks down the platform approaches by, in terms of the user, by a hobbyist or serious creator versus professionals or studios. Have you seen that any patterns there over time?
Well, I mean, I can just speak for Unity around this. The company really took off by laser focusing on the independent developer and the independent developer for mobile gaming. The company started with a web plugin back in, I think it was around 2007, 2008, maybe earlier actually, now that I think about it. The company's been in existence 13 years, so you do the math, I guess 2004, but really hit the scene around 2007, 2008 with a web browser plugin for delivering game graphics in a browser, and then moved into desktop and console platforms. And when mobile started taking off, the company invested heavily in supporting the mobile platforms, especially iOS, but also Android. And that really was about those platforms, making sure that our engine worked well there, and providing developers at the independent level with tools that were free to start with, really inexpensive to use. The mission of the company has always been to democratize game development. Now it's more broad. We're democratizing 3D creation in general with the advent of VR, AR, and mixed reality. And so that's been our life's blood. But what happened as a result of that is that the engine became so, what's the word I'm trying to look at here? So hardened, so industrial strength, and we invested a lot in features and performance to the point where the AAA studios, the high-end studios, that can spend a lot on a video game production, tens, hundreds of millions of dollars to develop and market and roll out a game, started looking at Unity as well, partly to reach these mobile platforms, but also they're using them in AAA settings as well for console titles and desktop games too.
So is it moving, or has Unity already moved out of the or expanded out of the mobile gaming? Like we talk to ad agency execs and they'll say, oh yeah, and then we do that in Unity.
Oh yeah. So what's really happened over the last 2 to 3 years is that Unity's usage has dramatically increased in other industries outside of the video game industry, and most of that has been driven by interest in virtual and augmented reality. So for virtual and augmented reality, you need 3D graphics tools and a 3D graphics engine, because the graphics being displayed are 3D. And so the idea that back before the virtual and augmented reality, brand creative might invest in a 3D project that could render 3D graphics onto a flat mobile phone using technologies like OpenGL or WebGL, which is the way that you connect to the device either through the web or native code. But to create a 3D experience that was still only experienced on a 2D flat screen like your classic mobile phone or a desktop, that's a lot of investment to still effectively get a 2D presentation on the screen. Even though you have interactive 3D graphics, you can navigate around the environments, you can click on objects, you can move things around. It is 3D graphics, but it's put on a flat screen. Now, in virtual and augmented reality, the graphics are actually 3D. You need to interact with them in 3D, and you have no choice but to use a 3D authoring system and game engine like Unity. So that's put us in a position now where when these other industries have come to work with virtual and augmented reality, they look at the tools out there and they're faced with a few choices. They could build all the technology from the ground up, or they could use an engine like Unity. And then they come to Unity because they see, and this not to plug Unity too much, but a couple of the really great things about the software are that first, it supports all the major VR and AR platforms. So that's a really big deal. So you can build something for an HTC Vive, and you can also make it work for an Oculus Rift without too much trouble. And you can also know that the assets you've created could be migrated over to an app you built for a mobile phone for phone-based augmented reality with Apple's AR kit, for example. And so the confidence that you don't have to bet on one particular platform is really high when you use Unity, because we cover all those platforms and we do it well. The second thing is the tool's just really affordable. I mean, it's free to start, and for pros, it's not that expensive. It's a monthly subscription fee, quite affordable. And then, for the big shops, we also do, enterprise level support with them and, higher touch services with them. But any independent developer shop of 1 to 2 to 10 people can get going with Unity, and it's really affordable. So those are the two big ones, and it's also beyond being affordable. It's easy to use. It's easy to get started. It's one of the easiest 3D tools out there. 3D tools are pretty hard to use in general, but Unity is arguably the most accessible 3D development system that there is.
So where does 360 video fit in all of this?
Well, so from a personal standpoint, I think this is a funny one. I talk about this a lot, and I get asked about 360 a lot, and as you can imagine, Chuck, I run in the circles with a lot of people who talk about VR. We do events, we do panels, we talk to people in industry, and we get these kind of questions a lot. And there's a faction within the VR world that doesn't think 360 is real VR because it's just video playing back, right? As opposed to giving you a fully graphical synthetic environment that you can move around in and interact with. In 360, you've got video mapped onto a panoramic sphere that's all around you. You can look all around, but you can't really move through it, at least yet. Those are future technologies being worked on. And so there's snobs out there. There are people who are detractors of 360. Even though my background is in interactive 3D graphics and I love it, I'm not one of those snobs. I think 360 is an amazing media type. We have lots of great cameras now that can capture and stitch, or there's accessible software for stitching these images together that come in from the cameras and quickly produce a really high quality 360 video. And they play back really well, especially on mobile devices. So for a lot of things, I mean, especially for live capture, there is no alternative right now to 360 video. But even for animated content, if you just want to create a linear movie and present it in a completely immersive way in 360, that could be an option, as opposed to trying to render it in real time, perhaps on a mobile device that doesn't have the computing capability of a powerful desktop computer. So 360 is a great media type for VR devices, in my opinion.
So where do you see the future of content for VR? I mean, it's obviously gaming is extremely sophisticated at the moment. Do you see applications going beyond that, movies, something like that?
So yes, to movies. We believe what we're calling today cinematic VR. Storytelling in virtual reality is making great strides. There are a handful of forward-looking new, folks on the block. These are content creation companies like Baobab, which is based in the Bay Area in Redwood City. Baobab Studios that have created amazing, compelling Pixar quality interactive pieces for the HTC Vive, for the Oculus Rift, that are just incredible. There's stories that you're in the middle of, you can move around in because these systems let you move around. They're positionally tracked, and you can play a part in the story. There's this piece called Asteroids that Baobab made, where you're a helper robot helping these two aliens on an intergalactic voyage, and they run into a crisis, and you have to help them through the story, and you ultimately save the day with them. But you're immersed in something that is effectively the quality of a Pixar film, or close enough, given that this is running in real time on a PC. It's kind of amazing. And so yeah, that medium is just getting started. Other companies like Within, LA-based, Chris Milk's firm, really innovating on storytelling, what it means to be a participant in or interaction means, what experiencing a storyline with somebody socially can mean, and they're just really breaking ground on this stuff. So Unity's super excited about that use around VR, but it goes far beyond entertainment. So I mentioned this earlier. A lot of industries are using Unity now to create virtual reality experiences, either to design new products or to assemble the products or to train their workers or to train their salespeople, to have their salespeople present things virtually to consumers. Everything I just talked about, for example, is happening in the auto industry. The auto industry is looking at designing cars in a completely different way. I don't know if you know how cars are designed today, but it's been this way for many, many years. The auto manufacturers, when they make a new car, they make a physical prototype that's out of clay. And to make those across all the different manufacturing facilities costs the manufacturers millions of dollars annually. And so they're looking at potentially replacing or at least enhancing those with virtual and augmented reality procedures. You take that same car, and then once that's designed, then to think about how it's going to be assembled, the factory floor it's going to be assembled on. They will build new equipment to assemble new cars, bespoke for that new car. They will visualize those in VR. They will train their workers in VR. And then, all the way down to selling these things in dealerships. Audi has rolled out a virtual VR car showroom for their cars in 100 dealerships now in Europe. So and that's just the auto industry, right? So when we look out there, we see many, many industries using Unity, many, many industries tapping into the power of VR to revolutionize their business processes. And we're not alone in this. All the major computer companies doing the hardware and software, Microsoft, Google, Facebook, they're all looking at all these other industries as well. It's not purely a consumer entertainment world for virtual and augmented reality. And when you even look at our statistics that we gather against usage, of the top 10 VR titles that we were doing our analytics system against and gathering data on, only 2 of them were tagged as games. In the App Store, they get sort of tagged at what genre they're in. The rest were either experiences or applications. So that's telling right there. We believe the use cases for all these technologies for immersion are going to be far beyond gaming.
So for various reasons, like cost, most consumers don't have an Oculus Rift or an HTC Vive or whatever. Do you see at least in the short term, the big play being a B2B play?
So yes, in a word, yes. So this is a really complex tapestry of technologies rolling out, right? We have these high-end virtual reality systems. So that's at the moment the equipment, the peripheral, the Oculus Rift, for example, plus the input controllers that come with it. That's in the small hundreds of dollars right now. That package is about $400, but you have to have a PC laptop. Now they just announced the iMacs working with some of these with the Vive hardware. I think they announced that today. They've talked about it at Mac developer conferences before, but you need a beefy computer, right? So a computer could cost you a few grand. Connected to, there are laptops that sub $1,000, but effectively something in the $1,000 to $2,000 range for a PC connected to this $400 peripheral. So that's going on, and for that cost and form factor, you're either talking about a hardcore gamer, a person that plays video games on their PC, already has the Steam system for downloading the games and buying the games, will get these peripherals. They'll do that, right? And then you have the home world with PlayStation. Into the home, where PlayStation VR is only a few $100s, and if you already have a PS4, you're good to go. So that cost of ownership's lower. And then you have these mobile headsets, right? The deluxe mobile ones like the Gear VR from Samsung or the Daydream from Google. The device itself is cheap, but it only runs with certain phones, right? So you get a $100 headset you have to pop a phone into. If you don't own that kind of phone, you got to go buy that phone, right? So we have all these levels of cost of ownership and quality levels as well. So there is something happening in the consumer world, but that's one of the reasons the consumer adoption is moving rather slowly, is because of these, primarily a lot of the cost issues. There are some other factors there too. On the enterprise side, that wouldn't be an issue at all. The idea of spending a few grand to make your workers more productive, to improve safety procedures for through a training application, that's small money, right? Combined with this, today's PC systems have a wire that connect the headset to the computer, right? That's a bit unwieldy. So once those wires go away, and they will over time, and those systems are being discussed right now, those are also impediments to having things in the home, which would be less onerous in an enterprise setting. So short answer, yes, we're going to see a lot of uptake in VR in the enterprise first, sort of similar to what happened in the world of the personal computer, which you and I remember, right?
Yep.
It started in your office. You got familiar with a personal computer in your office, and then all of a sudden these stores called CompUSA, which don't exist anymore, sprung up, and you could go to the mall and buy a computer to bring into your house, and that's because you knew about that and learned about it at work first. So we may see that with these PC-based VR systems as the way that adoption happens. But of course, on the other side of this, the completely other end, we now have phone-based augmented reality in our pockets with the newest iPhones, with the newer Android phones coming out. And so by the end of 2018, we're looking at 1 billion consumer devices that can use these new technologies that do simple phone-based augmented reality, where you're seeing true 3D objects in the room with you or on a tabletop with you. You can move around them. They have the persistence that they're not just a little bitmap sitting on top of your camera image. They really look like they're in the room with you, and you look through your phone and you have a magic window into this virtual world. So those technologies have a chance to hit a mass consumer audience in the next year. So that's, this whole thing is going, all these things are happening in parallel. So we could see a combination of consumer adoption of that kind of immersive experience via phones, while VR is taking hold in the enterprise or in some of the niche home entertainment stuff for the next few years. And ultimately, these things, I don't know if they all blend together into one device, but they kind of influence each other and knock into each other in terms of influencing consumer buying patterns and awareness.
So where do you see augmented reality in this context?
Well, so augmented reality, as in the phone, as I was just talking about, is going to be a great way for consumers to get a taste of true immersive content, magical things, digital objects laid onto the real world. That's like the Princess Leia hologram, right? But it's not really floating in space. You have to look through your phone right now. But a lot of us in the industry now, the way we chatter about it is we believe that in some point in the future, the next few years, not sure how many years, the phone is replaced by some smart glasses, or it's enhanced by some smart glasses. And that'll be the next device. So you look through glasses, so you don't have to hold your phone up. And you will see this magical world through some new, peripheral-like glasses that are comfortable to wear, not these big clunky VR goggles. And so when that happens, now you've got the full body, you've got your full body and hands back, and you can look through these glasses but not be shut off from the real world like you are in VR. And then you can enhance the real world with fun, with productivity, with more screen. You can now see more digital screens than you actually physically own. They could be put on walls anywhere around you. You could be an information worker looking at something on the shop floor and seeing information about it when you hit a button, an overlaid on it, a piece of equipment or something, an engine turbine for the energy industry that is malfunctioning. You can go see information about it and figure out how to troubleshoot it. I mean, it's sort of like the classic photocopier in the workplace that makes us all break into a cold sweat. At least it does me. When it's time to open the photocopier and troubleshoot it. Imagine if you had augmented stuff at your fingertips that could really show you how to find your way around that piece of equipment by overlaying information that was relevant as you needed it. So I think AR and glasses are going to move that way. Some people call that mixed reality. They don't call that augmented reality. These definitions are still a little fuzzy from the marketing, standpoint. But I think that's where that, plays into all this. We will see lightweight phone-based consumer. We'll see industrial use case headset-based stuff that converges hopefully into these smart glasses that are comfortable for anyone and everyone to use. And then how that then ultimately connects back to virtual reality, not sure yet. I think they're going to be experiences that are coming in different form factors, much in the way we have phones, desktop computers, and tablets, and power walls, and big screens like jumbotrons, right? We have all kinds of 2D displays out there for all kinds of use cases. We're going to have all kinds of immersive displays and input systems for the different use cases, and it's all the same medium, but the incarnation's a little bit different depending on what you're trying to do with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. So do you think ultimately most people will in fact wear glasses, although they probably won't be called glasses?
It's looking that way. When you say it that way, it's a really interesting question. I was just speaking at a meetup, one of our local gatherings on augmented reality and computer vision, and I was on a panel, and most of the panelists were touting that future vision, and this young fellow in the front row who wears glasses stood up and said, you guys talk about glasses like they're cool. right? Like they're cool, but I'm a nerd and I'm not sure, or is everyone going to wear them someday? I'm not sure, but it's sure looking that way now, 24/7. I don't know. They might still have the glasses handy and pop them on as needed, but we do that every day with sunglasses, don't we? So I can see it. I can see it happening. Um, of course, the more future forward-looking folks that talk about this stuff assume even the glasses are a waypoint toward, step on the way toward contact lenses or neural implants that can just overlay the information by tricking your optic nerves. Maybe above my pay grade. I don't know. I mean, I think about these things, but I'm also not a hardware designer and not thinking about waiting around till that wonderful future happens when there's so much we can do now with the hardware we have today. But yeah, next 3 to 5 years, I'm feeling like we could see a lot of uptick in smart glasses. We could see that really take off. And I mean, the way that I think the watch has taken off, it's taken off maybe less than some people like. I don't even wear a watch, so I don't have one. I don't have like a smart watch like an Apple Watch. But that's certainly become an interesting part of people's lives as an everyday peripheral. So the idea that the glasses we have today, either optical vision correction glasses or sunglasses, could be, the successor to that could be smart. I see it. I can see that happening.
So last question, where does audio fit in all of this? The Amazons and the Google Homes, they would think that we're a screenless world at home, not through audio interactions.
Oh, so you mean from the point of view of input, as in voice commands?
Yes.
I really personally very bullish on the future of voice commands. I would love to be able to just talk to my computer to do everything, at least to get things started. Like I'd love to dictate an email that way and then go in and edit it by hand afterwards. I'd love to. I'm a computer programmer by training. I would love to see a system that let me just tell it, okay, build me a mobile website right now, plug it into e-commerce, do an affiliate deal with Amazon, and code shows up on my screen, right? And then I can go tweak it afterwards. But it got me started and saved me days and weeks of coding. I mean, I love all that. I've got Google Home. I use it. I mostly use it to fire up Spotify. I occasionally do it to do searches. But I think that's because we're still in early editions of that. So I think voice input's going to be there. In VR, it's going to be a critical piece because messing with input controllers, I mean, there's some people doing virtual keyboard stuff now so we can type, but why not talk to your computers if you can talk to them? It's not going to replace other inputs completely, but it could greatly enhance a lot of human interaction.
Thank you, Tony Parisi, and thank you all for listening to the Voices of the Internet of Things.